I mean, what do you think? You think they stand a chance? You're on their side, aren't you? Who are you betting on,
Magic mirror on the wall. Who is the fairest one of all?
Look at these lies.
One shall stand, one shall fall.
Even if one of them survives.
The only way to stop him is to make another movie.
Welcome to the Celluloid Mirror. I am one of your hosts, Sean Mannion.
And I am another one of your hosts. I am Nicole Solomon. On the Celluloid Mirror, we usually take two different films and look at what they reflect about each other, the audience, and the culture at large.
But on this special Between Seasons bonus episode, we will be comparing and contrasting our favorite films of 2021. We'll go through our top 10 films of last year, discussing just really like why did they end up where they're at? Why do these films kind of rise above the others? Maybe comparing, Nicole's not as good opinions on what was the best films of the year to my much better opinions on what were the best 10 films of the year.
Or maybe the opposite of that.
Maybe the opposite of that. Maybe. It could be. They're actually mostly aligned. Like they're not that different.
Well, don't spoil it for them, Sean. They have to listen to the episode to reconcile the great suspense they are clearly all feeling about what my top 10 films are, as well as yours.
Exactly. I'm sure they're very concerned about it. No, we just talking about our favorite films of 2021.
So listen to this and then watch out for season 2 of the Celluloid Mirror proper, which will be coming very, very soon this year, which is now 2022 somehow. But for now, let's all time travel back to last year in the movies. And spoiler warning, we're not gonna hold back on things that happen in any of these movies. So if you haven't seen one of them and you don't want to know, just hit that go forward 30 seconds thing a few times. We're only going to be talking about each film for a few minutes. So, protect yourself before you wreck yourself.
Or they could go to our letterboxed and see what the films are that we watched and go like, oh, okay, let me go watch all of those movies and not be spoiled. That said, there are definitely things on your list that I haven't seen. I don't think there's anything on my list that you haven't seen.
There is. There is. Not much, but there is. Also, better yet, they could go to patreon.com/4milecircus and subscribe, and then they could read our top 10 list there with our sparkling commentary.
That's true. They could do that as well.
But Sean, for now, let's talk about some movies.
I think that's acceptable. That is an acceptable choice.
So we're going to count down starting at number 10, right? And just compare and contrast my number 10 film and your number 10 film and so on and so forth. Wow, what a great format that is for us to do.
It is for us to take two movies and compare them to one another and talk about what they might have to do with one another. It's almost like we should do a whole show based around that idea. But maybe not do 10 films at a time or 20 films at a time. Well, it's not even 20 films. Anyway, it doesn't matter.
Our episodes are long enough as they are.
What's your number 10?
My number 10 film, one change from when we posted our Patreon list. There will probably be more to come, but on our Patreon list, I had put Pig at number 10. But since we posted that list, I have seen The Matrix Resurrections, which then took the number 10 slot for me. My 10th favorite film of the year, right now at least, is The Matrix Resurrections. And what was yours, Sean? What was your number 10 film?
Judas and the Black Messiah, which is practically the same movie.
I really can't remember the differences between them, pretty much.
It's, I mean, if you look at it, they're both about attempts to, to not
They're
overthrow,
politically
but
minded films.
they're
Yeah.
politically minded, but about changing the power structure. One of them is much more successful than the other one, although arguably maybe Judas and the Black Messiah is almost like the prequel to the Matrix Resurrections, as the man did already. The man already did kind of win at the beginning of the Matrix Resurrections. So, you know, maybe they're a good pairing in that. Watch Judas and the Black Messiah, and then watch, you know, Matrix Resurrections.
Wait, one is more successful than the other in terms of changing power structures, or as a film? I wasn't clear what you meant by one being more successful than the other, or which one you meant. I guess
the power the power structures thing, because Judas and the Black Messiah, they didn't change the power structure.
Yeah. Spoiler alert for people who missed United States history. Judas and the Black Messiah is a film about the assassination of Fred Hampton Jr., and it ends with the assassination of Fred Hampton Jr. If you'd like to hear more about this, we did record a bonus episode just about this film that's available on our Patreon.
Right.
Yeah, it's a bummer of a film in that way. It's very hard for me to watch, even knowing that history, I guess, especially knowing that history, whereas the Matrix Resurrections is a much more optimistic. It does end with our protagonists in a more successful place in terms of their own goals.
Right.
That's true. Yeah. Gotcha. Now it's all coming together.
See, it's like the Matrix Resurrections is what we would hope would happen after Judas and the Black Messiah.
That's a good way of looking at it. So why did you put Judas and the Black Messiah in your number 10 position?
It was higher for a while. It was always in my top 10, basically, since we watched it like almost a year ago. It's a really good film. It's interesting to me because I don't have a whole lot of the history and the context and things like that. Did not learn a whole lot about it in the past. So it was interesting to have that dramatization of it and go, okay, let me go and read more about this and learn more about this. So it was good in that sense. And kind of stayed in there, but then my affinity for weird movies tended to push it down the list as more of those came out throughout the year.
Yeah, including, I would say, The Matrix Resurrections, which is a very weird movie, which is part of what I liked about it so much. I'm going to have to watch that one again. It's on my top 10 basically because I watched it pretty recently. I haven't kind of meditated on it enough to come to a kind of final, this is my take on The Matrix Resurrections. But I was delighted by it. I did really enjoy it. I liked what Lena Wachowski, chose to do with a sequel to a successful franchise that had some sequels that, as Sean and I have talked about recently, I now am a Matrix sequels defender. Like, I like them now. I didn't really initially, and now I do. But they're also not nearly as good as the first movie. Nor do I think Reloaded and Revolutions are as good as Resurrections is. I think Resurrections is a lot more interesting in what it's doing and where it's going, and I just applaud that. And that's why I kind of wanted to just sneak it onto my top 10 for sure, because I just think it's a very interesting approach to sequels. And I don't think we have time on this episode for me to even get into why, because it's a complicated, convoluted plot of that movie, but I was into it.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. It was good. I agree. It was better than the other sequels. I don't think it did make it on my top 10. But I definitely, we rewatched the sequels right before we watched that. And yeah, it was definitely better, although I didn't dislike the sequels as much as I did when I first watched them. I hadn't watched them since they had come out in the theater. So
yeah, I think they're a little underrated. Should we move on to number 9?
Yes, we should. What's your number 9?
My number 9 film of 2021 is Jane Campion's Western, I suppose, The Power of the Dog, which I don't think you've seen.
I have not seen that one yet, but my number 9 is Annette.
Ah.
And you have told me a little bit about what happens in The Power of the Dog, and that there's sort of a toxic masculinity thing happening there, which is pretty on point for pretty much anything about Westerns.
Yeah, I think Annette and The Power of the Dog actually are a very good pairing in terms of two different kinds of studies of men whose relationship with their own masculinity is both self-destructive and destructive to those around them. That's very much what both of those films are about, at least in part.
Yeah, and Annette was a really interesting one for how it explores that. And I probably shouldn't talk about it much more because we do have an episode that will be coming up this season about Annette and Little Murders. So.
Oh, yes, we do. So if you want to hear
that one in depth.
Yeah, there's going to be an episode coming up in season 2 where you will hear a lot of what Sean and I have to say about Annette. The Power of the Dog is, words. Sorry,
it's
listeners. It's a Western.
Toxic masculinity.
I was trying to remember the fucking name. I'm blanking on his name. Who plays
Benedict Cumberbatch?
No, not Benedict Cumberbatch. I remembered him. Fucking dude from Breaking Bad, and he's also in Jesse Plemons, yes, who is also in Judas and the Black Messiah. Kristen Dunst and Jesse Plemons are married. They're both broken people who get married and then go to live on the ranch that is owned by Jesse Plemons' family, where his brother, played by Benedict Cumberbatch, lives. And it's like, honestly, this film was the first section of it was like watching Funny Games for me. It's just all this like mounting domestic tension where like nobody's like committing overt acts of violence yet, but like Benedict Cumberbatch really likes to control the people around him and control his surroundings. It's an excellent performance of a scary guy who maybe meets his match then when Kristen Dunst's kid from a previous marriage, her previous husband died, comes to live with them when he's home from school in the summer, and he and Benedict Cumberbatch have a very interesting attraction repulsion kind of thing going on that plays out in very interesting and disturbing ways. And I think Jane Campion, it's masterful direction. She's got the audience, at least if they're me, right in the palm of her hand, and just like cranking up the tension in these subtle, quiet ways that was quite amazing to me. It's also a beautiful movie. Like the cinematography is just exquisite. Performances are great. Very into it. I think it would make a good double feature with Annette, which is about a stand-up comedian who is also self-destructive and harms people around him. And an opera singer. And a baby.
The baby's Annette.
Time Person of the Year, baby Annette. Should we talk about number 8?
Number 8. My number 8 is In the Heights, which is a musical from... I'm spacing his name, but the director of Crazy Rich Asians.
John Chu.
That's it. And I enjoy a musical, at least when it's well done. I think this was a well done musical. And I always have notes, but I had less notes than I usually do on modern musicals. I enjoyed the style of it. I enjoyed the way that it's about just an interesting sort of area, group of people, and there's a bunch of actors that I just really enjoyed in it, and it was really fun to watch a lot of them in a musical like Jimmy Smith's. I don't think I'd ever thought of Jimmy Smith's being in a musical before, so that was a big part of my enjoyment for that. What was your number 8?
My number 8 film is Passing, which was released on Netflix based on the novella by Nella Larson, who's a kind of Harlem Renaissance era writer who I started reading. I probably in college. I think I read Nella Larson in college, I read Quicksand in passing. I still have the same copy I got back then, which I've revisited a number of times. Especially Quicksand, actually, which this film was not based on. It's this one volume that has both novellas in it, and they're both excellent. Highly recommend. Quick read. Passing is a novella that is kind of infamously hard to adapt because what's going on is so internal. It's about a Black woman who lives in Harlem who kind of on a one-off goes into a like white only establishment downtown to like get a lemonade or something like that. She's pretty light-skinned and she's like passing for white in this one moment, but while she's there, she runs into this woman she knew as a child who's also a Black woman, but she's passing for white full-time, married to a super racist white guy who thinks she's white, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's also an interesting kind of repulsion attraction thing going on between these two women that then plays out over the course of the film. Like in The Heights, it is also set primarily in Harlem, which is interesting, albeit Harlem back in the, is it the 20s or the 30s? But anyway, around then. And it's a tricky book to adapt because it's so much about the main character here, played by Tessa Thompson, in a very good performance, her feelings and all these subtle things going on. It's not, a lot happening in the plot per se. It's more about like this relationship between the women and, their feelings about one another, which, it's a very queer movie. They never, sleep together or anything like that, but there is definitely a sexual energy between them. There's also a question of like, is Ruth Nega's character Claire sleeping with her friend's husband as she kind of subtly starts to suspect, wondering if there's something going on between them. And Claire, Ruth Nega's character, is also like really misses being around Black people and starts hanging out more in Harlem, but that's kind of dangerous for her in terms of continuing the ruse that her whole life is based on, and things don't go super smoothly. And I actually don't want to spoil this because I just don't, but the climax of both the novella and the film is ambiguous. That's all I'm gonna say about it. Like, it's written in the novella in an ambiguous way. And so one of the things I was so impressed by in this film was how they cinematically depicted so much ambiguity, especially at the climax, but throughout the entire film. It's a beautifully, beautifully shot film in black and white. It doesn't really look like anything else I'm seeing right now. Like there's a lot of great, beautiful black and white films. I just saw Come On, Come On, for example, which was also very good. This is really just on another level, though, in terms of its black and white cinematography, I think. And I highly recommend it to anyone who, just loves movies, honestly, and is interested in seeing how people tell stories on screen in different kinds of ways. So it's a kind of opposite movie from In the Heights in a lot of ways. It's definitely not like a musical. It's not a big, colorful, song and dance filled thing like that. It's much more restrained, from the color palette to the plot to the direction to everything else. But so they're kind of an interesting study of contrasts if you wanted to watch two very different takes on living in Harlem.
And there's also a little bit of, a very different sort of story. And then in The Heights, where one of them is talking about moving downtown, moving to another part of the city, and that and how that plays in, but a very sort of different dynamic related to that, very different kind of storyline related to that. But cool. What was we have the same thing for number 7.
Lucky number 7. The same film. We agree. We don't have to, rock'em sock'em robots to figure out supremacy like we've been doing for all the other ones.
Right.
I'm recovering from COVID, everyone. Sorry.
Saint Maud.
Saint Maud. That
was number 7.
We both saw that a long time ago, didn't we?
Yeah, I think we both watched it around the same time, like April maybe of last year, or or May. It was one of those movies that
Spring.
was supposed to come out in 2020 that I was really disappointed I didn't get to see, because I first started seeing the ads for it in like late 2019. And
They
then it
were
got delayed till
advertising that.
2019.
We saw
Mhm.
that preview, like, I think every time I went to the Alamo Draft House, which was a thing I used to do a lot. I would
Mhm.
see a Saint Maud preview, and there was that Billie Eilish song in the trailer, and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna see this movie. This is a movie for me. And then COVID,
Mhm.
but we did both eventually see it, and
Mhm.
I think it's an excellent film. I think it's an excellent
Yeah.
film. Does a thing I like that a few of the films on both of our lists do, which is have an unreliable protagonist that you're seeing things through the
Mhm.
eyes of. And I think that's the case with Annette to a degree as well, but it's a lot more, the point of view aspect, at least, is a lot more. In the case of Saint Maud, clearly you are seeing things through this character's perspective,
Yeah.
because at the very end, they actually like pull the veil off, and there's one shot where you're seeing things not from this character's perspective, but from how everybody else around is seeing it. And I actually don't want to spoil that last shot either, because it's a doozy.
Mhm.
And
It's very bright.
yeah, it was masterfully done. It's also a film
Mhm.
about like thorny, prickly women who are not exactly likable, and their relationships with one another, which is a thing I
Mhm.
like. That Saint Maud's about a nurse who is no longer nursing for reasons that become clearer as the film goes on, but clearly something bad happened with one of her patients, and she's
Mhm.
now working under a different name and gets hired to help out this terminally ill woman, and gets weirdly involved in her life in an obsessive, destructive way, involving Maud in her trauma, has turned to Jesus and become very devout in her own special way. She doesn't go to church. She just privately worships and judges other people and tries to
Mhm.
save them, including her employer. She's trying to bring her employer to Jesus. Her employer wants no part of Jesus. Tensions emerge. Things don't go super well, but it's
Why would they not go super well when somebody's trying to impose their, like, I need to save you on
I don't
somebody else?
know. I don't know, because I mean, she was just trying to help, just like Jesus, just trying to help.
Exactly. She just cares about your soul. That always leads to like positive results, right?
Definitely. And you know how Mr. Rogers famously said, in hard times, look for the helpers? St. Maud is one of the helpers. So, in these tough COVID times, if you want a little mood lifter, just watch St. Maud.
Don't watch the same mod for a mood lifter. Don't. It's not a mood lifter.
Speaking of mood lifters,
Nicole's recovering from COVID. Don't listen to her.
don't listen to me. I don't know what's going on. In this brain, it's just like a dial tone and fog right now.
Yeah, basically.
So,
and also recovering from COVID. So the usual, and then also.
And then on top of that, so speaking of mood lifters, Sean, what was your number 5 or number 6? Number 6. That's
Number
where we
six.
are. I
Number
can read
six.
numbers.
My number 6 was Pig.
Pig.
And which is one of those movies where you get Nicolas Cage doing a good job because he was paired with a good script and a director who's like, okay, Nick, you're going to do your thing. Here's how we're going to do your thing. And focuses it. And it's a nice, quiet performance from him. There's a couple moments where he kind of goes up a little bit grazes the edge of the full cage. But really, it's just a good, quiet movie that I didn't avoid it, but I didn't prioritize it early on when it came out because it kind of looked from the trailer. I was like, is this going to be kind of like a John Wick thing? I don't need, like, I'm not sure I need that. Like, I already watched Nobody, or, Nobody is a good sort of version of that, or a fun version of that. But I was kind of like, I don't know, like, but I'd heard good things, and I was like, okay, it's probably good. And then it has moments that feel like that, but it's just a much better, much more interesting, much more affecting, I think, version of of that sort of story of where a mysterious man loses something, and then in this case a truffle pig, and
That he
then
loves
goes in
so
search
very
of it.
much.
That he loves that pig very much. And they're sort of an interesting version of what I feel like. There's a lot of ways in which I've kind of felt like, oh, I've seen a couple of versions of this movie. Usually it's like a low budget action movie where somebody's like, we're going to look at the dark, weird underbelly of this subculture. And in this case, it being chefs outside around the Portland area. But it was a much, much more interesting version of that, with a great climax that was not exactly what I was expecting, and is much more earned, I think, than most of those kinds of films. So
Yeah, I agree with all that. Like, as discussed, Pig was on my list, and I loved Pig. It's, hovering right under the cutoff of my top 10. And my number 6 film was one we've already discussed, which is Judas and the Black Messiah. These are both films that I find hard to watch. Judas and the Black Messiah much more so than Pig. I don't want to compare them, except that there are number 6 films, so our job is to compare them. But but they are ones that I both found very emotionally affecting and hard to watch, albeit on very different levels in different ways. Judas and the Black Messiah, obviously, because it's about a real person who was really murdered by the United States government. Pig, because it's about Nicolas Cage, like Sean said, in a great, restrained, subtle performance that reminds you that he can actually act, who loses his beloved pig, and that, pulls at my heartstrings. When talking about it before, I remember, Sean, you discussed Pig as being a sentimental film, which I think is true.
yeah, it's a very sentimental movie.
It's not, which I would not say Judas and the Black Messiah is. And the sentimentality is one of many reasons beyond just the plot, subject matter, etc., why the ways in which they're hard to watch are not on the same level. Pig is sad. Judas and the Black Messiah is sad and bleak in a lot of ways, in ways that are just how the real world is bleak. Doesn't mean give up hope, stop struggling, but it's, more realistic about your government's doing really bad things. Has been, still is. This is how it goes. Whereas Pig is obviously on a much smaller level than any of that. But they are both films that I really liked and would like to watch again, and I don't know when I will.
Right.
Judas and the Black Messiah especially, but Pig also. It's just because now also I know everything that's going to happen, and I'm just braced for it. On another super uplifting note, number 5 films. I actually haven't seen yours, Sean. Do you want to talk about your number 5?
You want to talk about the one that makes me like a morally reprehensible person, according to some of the internet?
I have been following the controversies about this film. I'll watch it as soon as I can see it at home. But
I saw a person who I used to follow on TikTok who talks about movies, but really mostly, when I say talks about movies, mostly talk about Marvel stuff, defending one of their pals who also mostly just talks about Marvel stuff. This morning I just kind of skimmed through. I unfollowed both of them because there's a certain point at which the constant I wonder what this thing is going to be, and trailer analysis and stuff. I'm and also sometimes just completely getting shit wrong about movies in general got tiresome, but they have big platforms. Anyway, I saw them talking about how this film, Licorice Pizza, Paul Thomas Anderson's a new movie, is problematic and never addresses how it's problematic. And the thing about it being problematic that people are pearl clutching about is it is about a relationship between a 15-year-old boy and a 25-year-old young woman. But I've seen people say things like it is somebody.
It's normalizing pedophilia, Sean. That's what I've heard.
Except I feel like those people don't understand what pedophilia is. When a 15-year-old boy starts hitting on a 25-year-old woman, and she says, "You're 15, go away," and that is their thing. I saw people say something about grooming. I'm like, that's not what that is. Hush.
Yeah, it's funny because when it first got raised, when I first started seeing people saying that shit, honestly, I was like, I know Sean liked that movie a lot, and Sean's usually pretty sensitized to that sort of stuff. Like, I remember you dropped Riverdale like a hot potato because you were like...
Yeah, because but it's not creepy about it. She's very, very explicitly like, no. And their relationship tends to be him pursuing and her going, no, but maintaining a friendship with him for various reasons. Like, they have a chemistry between them. Like, there is, but she maintains it as a friendship.
There's chemistry that's not sexual. There's other kinds of chemistry.
Right. And I think there's a romantic chemistry that happens between them. I think that there are times where it skirts the edge of being somewhat sexual, but it's never, it's certainly sexual from his standpoint, but it's never, which is not surprising.
It's not creepy for kids to have sexual feelings towards adults. That's normal.
Right. And it's also one of the things that I would argue with it is the point of what is going on in their relationship is he has grown up a little bit too fast. He is a little bit too mature, or has being expected to be a little bit too mature. And she has not grown up, and she has not really grown up very much for like being 25. Like, she's a little immature. He's a little bit too mature, or at least thinks he's too mature. And the truth is like both of them their relationship is about both of their growth in some ways. And it's not that I don't agree with people who are saying this thing. And obviously, and I don't want to get into arguments with people online, because it's a stupid place to have arguments with people, because it just doesn't work. And I fucking hate it anyway. But it's a good movie. Is it a great? Did I absolutely love the movie? No, but I really enjoyed it. The fact is, it is not a very clearly structured film. Like, there's a beginning, middle, end, and there's a 3-act structure to it, but it doesn't follow the same kind of beats a film like this normally would, which I think makes it harder for people who are used to, frankly, mostly just watching Marvel movies. And I love my Marvel movies. I know that's, a thing. Everybody's tired of them now, but I enjoy the shit out of them. But I also don't rank them very highly, because that's not what they're for. And this, I'm like, just like, maybe this movie is, I don't even want to say too smart for you, because it's not that smart of a movie, but it's a really well-made movie. He's made better movies, but it was a really well-made movie this year, and I appreciated something different. For one thing, I appreciated having 2 leads who did not look like sculpted movie stars, like most movies, including many of the movies on this. On my list otherwise. Like, they just look like two teenagers from the 70s, so
well,
I liked it.
When I eventually see it, when it's available to rent at home, I will see it, and then I can tell you why you're a terrible person for liking this movie. That
I feel like you and Annie, I think Annie hasn't watched it either. I want you guys both to watch it, and then accuse people who don't like it, and accuse it of pedophilia, of anti-Semitism.
You're talking about friend of the show, Annie Malamet, who is also going to show up in season 2 to talk about Hellraiser 2 and Return to Oz with us.
Yes. I just because the lead, who they're all accusing of being a pedophile, is Jewish.
Yeah.
And
what's her name?
Like,
Chaim.
I can't. Alana, I think.
Yeah.
I can't accuse people of being anti-Semitic in this sense, because that it comes off wrong. But if you guys could do that for me, that would be great. I don't actually mean it. I don't actually think it is necessarily, but I think it'll shut some people up. Just be like, it seems a little anti-Semitic that you would accuse the
I
Immature
hate to
Jewish girl.
I hate to burst your bubble, Sean, but that shit doesn't work. If you remember any of the actual anti-Semitism that bubbled up during the Democratic primary, when people are self-righteous about something, they will. That's when suddenly they don't care about anti-Semitism anymore.
Perhaps. I don't know. People forget about this movie in a couple months anyway. And honestly, like, it's not really worth it. It's one of those examples where it's not really worth it to listen to people's opinions about movies, like on social media for the most part, because I'm just like, most of you can't like just watch a movie by and for adults every once in a while. I say this as somebody who doesn't do that as often as I should myself.
Well, I do want to see it. It's definitely on my list of films to see. My number 5 film, which has some things in common with Licorice Pizza, at least in terms of how you just described it, is Masking Threshold, which you have not seen and you should see. It's not easy to see right now, unfortunately. I saw it at the HP Lovecraft Film Festival, which was online, and I bought a ticket specifically to see this film. Which is Johannes Grenzferner, friend of the show, I guess. He's our patron. So, hi, Johannes. If you happen to be listening to this, your film is our number 5, and it, that was the case before you joined our Patreon. So, no corruption here in the lists. Just a happy coincidence that this is a film I thought was fucking great. It is a weird, unique vision. My Letterboxd review was, I think I said it was the touching story of a skeptic finding his way to God, which once you watch the film, you'll understand what I mean by that. It's about a guy he's an atheist. He's very smart in a lot of ways. He has this sudden tinnitus he's dealing with that's driving him crazy. He's going to doctors and specialists and no one can explain what's going on. So he starts trying to use the scientific method in his own home to try to determine what is causing this tinnitus and its fluctuations and things like that. And as you might imagine, if you're stuck in a room all by yourself trying to solve the mystery of your own tinnitus, you might start to go a little bit crazy. You might start to get a little bit unhinged. And this is just the story of this guy's journey through that. It's shot in a very distinct way. It's almost all, or maybe it is all, these macro shots, these close-ups. You're seeing it largely from his actual point of view. And then there's also a lot of archival footage of different things that is cut in as well. And, similar to Saint Maud, or to a lesser degree, Annette, it's another one of these like unreliable narrator protagonists. You're hearing everything. You're hearing and seeing the whole story from his point of view. And he isn't necessarily the person who you want to trust on any of these matters as he becomes increasingly unhinged. And it deals with a pet favorite subject of mine, which is what I like to call fundamentalist atheism, which is when people are like, I'm a free thinker, blah, 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 but they're actually just as dogmatic as a religious person. It's just that the thing that they're clinging to as like the truth and what makes them better than other people and their salvation, etc., is their lack of belief in a deity, which I'm like, I don't care. Like, great, cool. Whatever. I won't get into my own personal feelings about religion right now. But it's written by, like Johannes, himself is definitely an atheist. And I believe, maybe we can have him on the show sometime and ask him about this, but I think he has a lot in common with the character in a lot of ways. I think he empathizes with this character in a lot of ways, but also isn't afraid to then take this person who has things in common with him and show how that can go down a very bad path also. And I thought that it was just brilliantly done, very innovative filmmaking. It was not shot during COVID. It was shot pre-COVID, I happen to know, and edited during COVID, but it's all shot in this one room. So it feels, it felt like, I wondered at first, I was like, was was this a COVID project? But it's, you know, I think there's one other actor you see in the film other than the main character. It's just on a formal level interesting, and I think really, really works. It's also quite disturbing. So if you don't want to see a guy losing his mind in a kind of realistic way, maybe don't watch this movie. But if you do, and if you're interested in people doing cool, innovative stuff in low budget horror that's actually really smart and good and effective, then definitely check this out.
Mm-hmm.
So it's basically
Cool.
the same movie as Licorice Pizza.
It sounds like it's the exact same thing, like virtually. Speaking of movies that are probably the exact same thing, what's your number 4?
My number 4 is Summer of Soul, which is Questlove's documentary about, God, now I'm going to have to look this up. My fucking brain. I'm forgetting the exact name of the music festival that took place in Harlem that is sometimes called Black Woodstock. This huge music festival, tons of like, just, you know, A-list amazing performers, you know, like Nina Simone and Sly and the Family Stone and all these, you know, just like creme de la creme. The Harlem Cultural Festival. That's what it was called. And another Harlem movie. Yeah. And it functions both really well as a documentary with like amazing performance footage. I know there's tons more that didn't make it into the film that's in this vault somewhere. But like the performances are amazing, but also the film does a really good job of giving the political context of this festival, both in terms of why it came about in the first place, as well as why afterwards, like basically all knowledge of it just went into a vault that was sitting in a basement. Like it was all filmed. There was never anything done with the footage until Questlove took it upon himself to, you know, direct this documentary about it. It was a event that I had been completely unaware of, I believe, until this documentary came out. And yeah, in terms of American history and politics, as well as music history and just great music, it's an absolutely essential film. And just as documentaries go, I think very, very, very well done. And what was your film in number 4? I think it's the same one, right?
Basically the same thing. I didn't see Summer of Soul, but basically the same thing as Barb and Star Go to Vista Del Mar, which was a wonderfully charming film that I saw almost at the beginning of 2021 and was actually my top movie for a lot of 2021 because it was just a lot of fun to watch. And it starts with this kid on a bicycle singing a song, delivering newspapers, and he's singing on a bike. And I was just like, well, I love this movie already. It was one of those movies where I'm like, well, whatever else happens in this movie, even if everything else is terrible, I have this beginning. And it's just like a sweet, like weird, charming movie where it's about 2 middle-aged Midwestern women, or Minnesota women, I don't remember what they are, but like that kind of stereotype of 2 Midwestern middle-aged women who go to Vista Del Mar on vacation. And in the middle of that, or while that is happening, they get embroiled in a plot by some sort of supervillain. And it's just all this like bizarre stuff happening. And they're 2 just kind of mostly oblivious ladies as this is going on. And it was just a fun, weird movie. And it was especially very welcome at the beginning of 2021. So.
Yeah, that's another one that's hovering right underneath my top 10 list and was on it for a good portion of the year until I just saw a ton of shit at the end of the year that bumped it down a bit. But yeah, I love that too. And that's one, I think I saw it before you did, and I was like, you should watch this. You're gonna like it more than maybe you think you will even, because when I saw it and I saw just how weird it was, and I'm like, oh, there's like a whole sci-fi element to this. There's all this like fantastical stuff that happens. I'm like, oh, Sean needs to see this. He's gonna enjoy this. He's gonna have fun with this. And I did too. I thought it was delightful. It's her name, Annie Mumolo, is that her name? And Kristen Wiig play the titular Barb and Star, and they're great. My understanding about that film is it's kind of like what they wanted Bridesmaids to be before the studio was like, you can't have this movie be that weird.
Right, yeah, because Momolo was also involved with Bridesmaids. She wrote it. She co-wrote both of them,
Yeah.
And so, yeah, they were like, well, we want Bridesmaids to be this. And then, so they finally got to make something more like what they wanted to make, which good for them.
Yeah,
I would say in the end, it's a much better movie than Bridesmaids.
I completely agree.
Quite a bit.
Same. I liked Bridesmaids, but I loved Barb and Star Go to Vista Del Mar. I don't know what the hell it has in common with Summer of Soul beyond being a movie made in the United States, but like...
Is it sunny during Summer of Soul?
Yeah.
There you go. The sun plays in a lot in Barb and Star Go to Vista Del Mar. The sun is very important to it. So the sun brings it all together.
Let the sun shine into our number 3 selections.
What was your number 3?
My number 3 selection, which may move up on this list as I watch it again, I'm suspecting, is Titan.
I believe it's Titan.
Titan? Whatever.
I don't know.
It's French.
It's French.
Titan.
Titian.
Titiani. Sure. That's, Julia Ducournau. I don't know how to pronounce her last name. Ducournau. Sean's our resident French expert today.
You took French. You told me this just the other day. You should be able to pronounce all these things. Come on.
I should be able to do a lot of things right now, Sean, that are absolutely beyond my capabilities. The lady who directed Raw, another movie I liked a lot, but I think I liked this one even better. It is weird. It is disturbing. It is beautifully photographed. I didn't know where the fuck this movie was going. I went into it not knowing very much, and I'm glad. I'm glad of that, because it was a ride. It was emotional. Much like Masking Threshold, if you do not have a tolerance for kind of disturbing things in horror, this isn't the movie for you. But if you like body horror and films kind of exploring ideas about gender and love and firefighters dancing, you should definitely check out Titanani, as I've decided it's pronounced.
And then basically the same thing with my number 3 is the Grian Knig.
Oh, the Grian Knig. That was another one hovering right under my top 10.
One of the things I kind of like about The Green Knight is that when it came out, I went and saw it. I went and saw it at the theater in the summer, and it was one of the first things I went back to the theater for. And when cases were actually down, it wasn't something that was like across the board. Everybody was like, I love it. Like, I saw people who loathed the movie and people who loved the movie, and it was on both sides of it. And, I appreciate when we get more of those, when it's like, when a movie is so particular in what it is doing and its visual style and its distinctness, that it really does like become a thing where you either love it or you hate the movie and you can't stand anything about it. Like, I think there's not enough of those. There's a lot more movies that people are kind of lukewarm about. There's a lot more movies where people are, I'm not to say everybody's loathe or love this movie, but like that, there were really strong reactions to it, that it wasn't just all people going like, oh, I love it. And it's nice to see. I'm not super into like Arthurian stuff, but I have enough I studied a little bit in school. I read this particular story, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, in school, and they do a lot of Arthur adaptations. In the last 20 years or so, they're usually not worth watching. I don't think I've seen most of them because they're all trying to make it real. They're like, we're going to do a story of the real Arthur. I don't fucking want to watch a movie about the real Arthur. I want to watch one where there's a wizard. I want to watch something where there's, ghosts and witches and whatever else that they decided to cram into those old stories, because that's what I want. King Arthur's not a real person. Was never a real person. Is not like, and people who are like, no, he might have been real, and he was not real. I think when it comes to the Arthur stuff, like, it should be weird. It should be kind of over the top. There's the Excalibur movie from 1980 by John Borman, which was interesting. This one, I think, leans a little bit more into some of the weirdness. Yeah, it was fun to watch for me for those reasons. I really like, and it also these things are just things that happen. Nobody's like, well, we got to explain it, or what is this? There's a ghost. There's giants. And they're just walking by. There's the Green Knight himself, and I enjoy that, and I don't feel like we get enough of, because there's a lot in the Arthur stories that is weird and can be a good sort of source for that, as opposed to trying to be sort of middle of the road or realistic. There's Excalibur. I've always been a big fan of, one of my favorite Disney movies is The Sword and the Stone, and the more recent Joe Cornish film, The Kid Who Would Be King, that didn't do very well, but is actually a lot of fun as far as like a kid's movie about sort of playing on the Arthur legends and the Arthur stories and Merlin and stuff like that. And Edgar Wright's The World's End, which is not explicitly an Arthur story, but is very much it's modeled on a Grail legend, an Arthurian Grail legend. So those are fun.
Yeah. I don't know if I'd say I loved it, but I did really like The Green Knight. I only saw it like, I don't know, a couple weeks ago, I think. But I liked it a lot. It is similar to Titane in that they are both very weird movies that, I guess if you've read the story The Green Knight's based on, maybe you know what's going to happen, but I didn't really. And they're both kind of bleak movies in a lot in a lot of ways. It's not The Green Knight isn't the hero's story I kind of thought it was going to be, which is cool. I think I don't actually want to give away the ending of either film, even though we said we would, but I don't want to. But if you see both of these films, the endings I think have quite a bit in common that has to do with why I found them both as satisfying as I did. The Green Knight is a very cool, distinct, odd film as well. You were saying?
Oh, I was going to say, what's your number 2 film?
My number 2 film is yet again, Baby Annette. Annette is my number 2 film. I'm going to be honest. It probably eventually is going to settle in the number 1 spot, maybe, unless something else does. Because if we're being real, like Annette, I've watched that shit 4 times this year. I love Annette. We talked about it a little before. We're going to talk about it a lot on an upcoming podcast episode. And I do want to talk about it a little bit more in relation to your number 2 film. But for now, I'm going to kick it over to you, Sean. What is that number 2 film of yours that I want to talk about with Annette?
Last Night in Soho, which is also one where I'm aware that a lot of people really don't like it, and I understand why. I mentioned Edgar Wright talking about The Green Knight, and his Arthur sort of play on Arthur. I like a lot of Edgar Wright's movies. I haven't watched Baby Driver, but I enjoyed Last Night in Soho. It's the kind of ghost story that I really like, and they don't make a whole lot of these kinds of ghost movies anymore. We get a lot more like demon possessions, or a lot more of the Conjuring movie, or the, what do you call it, the Paranormal Activity type things, where it's tied to some sort of demonic thing too often, as opposed to this kind of ghost story where there's a connection being made between somebody and a ghost or ghosts, and a mystery. They get kind of embroiled in a little bit of a mystery, trying to figure out, well, what happened to this person or these persons. That really worked for me. The twist is something that at the end, that's something that I know bothers people, where people are just like, that's no good. And I just didn't see it wasn't that important to my enjoyment of the film, because the rest of it was all kind of what I enjoyed. And Edgar Wright does a good job of shooting a lot of sequences where we weave back and forth between the main character and this person whose life that she is observing. And I really enjoyed it. I like the cast. You get a little bit of Terrence Stamp doing a role that I don't think he's been allowed to do quite as much lately. He kind of got sucked into the world of mostly getting cast in Superman related stuff, or things where his old role from that was keeping him employed. But seeing him sort of back in this sort of British sort of street level sort of film, just being an unsettling guy was nice, and his creepiness was a lot of fun to watch. But that's my Last Night in Soho.
Yeah, Last Night in Soho is, I think, the only film, or at least I'd say this is the film we probably disagree about the most on either of our lists that we've both seen, and that I'm one of those people who really disliked Last Night in Soho. I did like a lot of things about it. I thought it was beautiful. I thought even at home, the sound design worked really well. I think Anya Taylor-Joy is really good in it. And in general, like, technically, I think it's excellent. I kind of wished I had seen it in a theater for that reason, to just experience the cinema of it all. But in terms of the story, I was very disappointed, because I thought it was super fun at the beginning. Like Sean said, it's a ghost story, and I was interested in the protagonist, like, she goes to sleep at night, but is she having dreams, or is she kind of time traveling and witnessing, this other woman in the past, and what's going on with it all? I was into it. The thing that rubbed me the wrong way from very early on, but I was kind of willing to kind of mostly ignore until it became like the main substance of the film, was how it's a film about how, like, there are dangers for ladies everywhere. You go into the city and there's just men around every corner waiting to exploit you in one way or another. Well, no, it's always going to be sexually. They're going to sexually exploit you in one way or another. From the cab driver, when she first gets into the cab, who's like kind of hitting on her and being creepy, which is, to my memory at least, kind of the first indication of like, what's her name, the actress, or the name of the character? Or...
Thomasin McKenzie.
Thomasin McKenzie, that's right. I was like, how am I not remembering
Eloise.
her? Thomasin McKenzie plays Eloise, our protagonist, who's like obsessed with 1960s Soho. She's in the present day and is going to school there for fashion design, I believe. And, at the beginning, it's this kind of like coming of age story about like, my dreams are somewhat being punctured. Stuff isn't exactly the way I imagined it, but also there are good things. And like, this guy's flirting with me and blah, 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 and that I was enjoying. But as it got more and more into the like, no, there is sexual exploitation around every corner for young, pretty ladies, I was kind of like, okay, Edgar Wright. And to be fair, this film was written or co-written by a woman. So sometimes people are like, oh, a movie about feminism by a man. And it's like, well, it is directed by a man, but it was written or co-written by a woman, which to me speaks to the fact that women can make trying to be feminist films that I actually find very anti-feminist just as well as a man can. My main problem with the film wasn't specifically the twist at the end, although I didn't love that either, but the fact that I know one of the things you liked about it, which I really get and feel, is that it's a ghost story that's not Christian, right? It's not a Christian propaganda. I think you wrote that on our Patreon. I was like, oh, that's a good point. That makes a lot of sense. I get that. A lot of like The Conjuring or whatever, it's Christian propaganda. And this isn't, but I did feel that it was swerf propaganda. And that really just was like, it's a anti-sex work movie. Whether it's intending to be or not, I 12,000% see it as a like, sex work is bad movie. I don't know how you could not get that message from it. I mean, not you particularly, but I mean,
you just said that. So how did I not get that from it? Like, that's what you just said, right? Because
I didn't mean you. I meant like, what I meant as I was saying it is I don't know how audiences wouldn't be getting anti-sex work messages from this film.
I can see that. I think it was clumsily done, like in that sense. Like the way I read it was that the focus was, so my sort of other side of the dangers for ladies is while that was happening in the modern day, she had the boyfriend or ish almost boyfriend guy who wasn't trying to exploit her, but which was, I think they're kind of like, oh, but not all the guys are like that. But I think it was a lot more about, to me, the way I was reading it was a lot more about, there is a candy coated view of especially the 60s, especially particular like eras of the 60s that we keep getting kind of shown over and over, whether it's hippies or it's this sort of mod view of the 60s. And this is a character who's obsessed with it, and it was sort of, to me, it was a little bit less general, and it was a little bit more like, there's a view that this was sort of a more innocent time, a special, like unique, separate thing where people don't kind of acknowledge that like bad things happened and people were being exploited, and that was what a lot of what was driving a lot of what was happening during those eras. Was there was a lot of exploitation that was happening during that, and I think it was sort of going for that. I don't think it did it great. I don't think that twist at the end was handled particularly well, or the way that it handled it. When it was approaching the sex work thing, I was like, okay, you're not right. You're trying to ride a line here that's not working. I see what you're trying to do, but you're trying to ride a line here that isn't working the way that you think it should. But to me, it was a lot more about the 60s were not this candy coated, like special time of love and excitement that people think that people like to fantasize it was. It was a time where people were being abused and exploited, and which is true.
Right. But why do sex workers always have to be the embodiment and symbol of that exploitation?
No, I agree with you on that. Like, I think, as I said, I don't think it was handled particularly well. It doesn't bother me quite as much. But yeah, when I was watching, I was like, oh, okay, you're doing that. Cool. No, great. No, don't do that. But yeah.
Yeah. I wanted a couple things that I wanted to raise, because this pairing is actually one of the reasons why I wanted to do this episode, because I think Last Night in Soho and Annette are really interesting to look at together as different depictions of men exploiting women and endangering women in different ways, because Annette is also about that. I did quickly want to speak to the thing about her boyfriend not boyfriend in it, because that was actually, that you reminded me, that was another thing that really just early on started really bugging me and got worse rather than better. Like, it's a very white movie. You've got one black dude in the movie, as I recall. I think he's the only character of color who's a principal character, who's the nice guy who's into Thomas and Mackenzie and nice and helpful to her through the whole movie for reasons that I cannot possibly fathom other than the needs of the plot, because she's awful to him and he is repeatedly seriously endangered and worse by his interest in her. And he also doesn't have any character beyond being a genuinely nice guy. And that bothered me. There's one part in particular where Thomas and Mackenzie's character is having a kind of psychotic break and starts freaking out, and her landlady, played by Diana Rigg, and I love Diana Rigg. I wanted to love Diana Rigg in this role and in this movie, and it just didn't come together for me. Like, calls the cops, and he's in a position where there's a lot of very loaded, very real dynamics of state violence and racism right there in a movie in a way that was going to give me a panic attack. And the movie didn't care about any of that. It did not engage with any of that. It was just another aspect of the plot following her story, and that felt exploitative to me. I did not like what they did with that character, or perhaps non-character.
I mean, nobody gets any development other than the main character, which is a problem with the film. It's not like nobody, like all the bully girls, the mean girls are very one-dimensional. Like, she doesn't really develop a whole lot of relationships with a lot of other people and stuff like that. And it's yeah, I mean, it's not a movie without plenty of problems.
Yeah,
as I said, most reason it lands where it does for me is the kind of story it is, and that I could enjoy it for the most part in the moment.
And God knows I never like movies that have any problems. All of the movies I like are perfect and unproblematic, definitely. But yeah, my take is technically liked Last Night in Soho a lot. Story-wise, hated it. I like Annette a lot, though, as a film that deals with some similar issues of how men hurt women, and is also a film directed by a man. And Annette was written by men as well. I don't think there were any women maybe behind the scenes of that at all. And however it did, that does really work for me as like an indictment of certain things.
And I will add, just to finish off with Last Night in Soho, that I do agree that for a movie set in London, it is very white. London is not nearly as white as that movie is, but honestly, that is a criticism that could be leveled against most of Edgar Wright's work. And I mean, frankly, most British filmmakers' work. England is not nearly as white as it is often depicted. Yeah.
One quick recommendation I want to make that Last Night in Soho made me think of, which is Dorothy Arzner's Dance Girl Dance, which is a film that takes place in the, I want to say, 30s, amongst kind of showgirl type women doing this kind of dancing that's like kind of in a burlesque context. It's not stripping, but it's sexy. And that's kind of when the Anya Taylor-Joy character who is a singer who wants to get into show business, and she gets into show business, but it's in this exploitative way from this guy who ends up pimping her out. And the reason we know it's bad is we cut to her in this dance routine. And this was when I actually started hating the movie. She's doing this dance routine that's kind of like, you know, a sexy burlesque type number. And from the jump, when we cut to it, it's her like miserable in a like kind of sexy costume. And but before we even know anything about the context of how she's getting pimped out or anything like that, cinematically, what the film, I believe, is banking on the audience getting is like, oh, of course, this is terrible. And I was like, what's so bad about this? She's doing a dance routine. Like, she's, you know, I get that it's not her dream of artistic fulfillment, but like, why are we immediately supposed to get that just this routine in and of itself is degrading? That really bothered me. And Dance Girl Dance, which was made almost 100 years before it, deals really well with a lot of the complex dynamics for women doing that kind of dancing and ways in which it can be exploitative and not, that does not raise for me the kinds of problems that came up in Last Night in Soho. So I always want to tell people to watch Dorothy Arzner movies. So Dance Girl Dance, that would be an interesting double feature with Last Night in Soho, in my opinion.
Oh, cool.
What was your number one movie? Oh,
my number. Oh, well, you finished the question first. So my number one was Tatine, which I just was pretty riveted by throughout the whole movie. It was one of those ones where I couldn't really, I could not look away from it, and I also had a very hard time watching parts of it. Which is nice because like sometimes I just have a hard time watching like when movies get graphic. I don't have as much of a stomach for gore or certain kinds of on-screen depictions of violence that I used to be able to stomach. But I was trying to continue to watch it, even though I was like, well, I don't want to. She's gonna beat her face into the sink to break her nose, which was really a fantastic scene overall. Yeah, I was just if there are ways in which it feels like it's a classic Cronenberg movie and it's sort of body horror and yet also being kind of like Crash. And I particularly enjoy that. I feel like I never really know all that much about the main character's motivations. I don't know why she's doing what she's doing at the beginning of the film. She kills some people and I'm never really clear on why, and I don't want to. I just am like, okay, cool, like this is what we're doing. And I don't, by the end of it, I don't really know anymore about motivations for things. It's just what she does. This is who she is. Maybe she's a serial killer. I wasn't really entirely clear on it, but I also did liked that I didn't have anybody giving me like well, here's what's going on and here's where she's at. There was nothing like that. There was no her giving explanations. She hardly talks for most of the movie. And she gives a great performance for most of it, as does the lead actor, the lead male actor, and the chemistry between the two of them is interesting, particularly for the parts of the film, the significant parts of the film where she is pretending to be his son, and I have not decided yet whether or not he ever actually believed that she was his son or just accepted it because he needed that. And I'm fine with it being like, it's one of those I'm usually fine with things being ambiguous, but in particular I feel like there's a lot about this movie that just allows itself to be ambiguous, allows itself not to explain, it doesn't explain itself. It's beautifully done. I did not watch her last movie Raw because from the trailer it was just like the stuff with the people and the eating people and stuff like that was something I was just like, I don't know if I can watch that. I don't know. Like I have a hard time watching that stuff now. And I'll probably go back and watch it. I know it's a good movie. I hadn't, but when I saw the trailers for this one, I was like, I don't know what this is, but this looks really cool and I want to see what this is. And it was, and actually most of the trailer is like from the first like 20 minutes of the movie or something like that.
They did a good job not giving shit away.
Yeah, and I don't really want to give much away except for, as I said, like the main character pretends to be some guy's long lost son, and and Nicole mentioned there's firefighters and there's dancing firefighters. It is difficult, I think, at times to watch in terms of like just like physically what's happening, and some gore, some body horror, and I suppose like parental guidance warning for fucking a car. But if you don't want to see like your kids, if you don't want your kids to see somebody fucking a car, I guess don't watch this movie. If I had kids, that's all they would watch is car fucking movies, but that's why I don't get to have children.
Well, that was a journey. And that was the Celluloid Mirror Between Seasons episode. My number one as of right now is Prano Bailey Bond's film Censor, about British woman in the 1980s who's a censor on the film board, slicing up video nasties to make them presentable for British audiences. And she is dealing with the trauma of her sister's mysterious disappearance when they were children. This trauma was formative to her and is forming a lot of her worldview and need for control, which manifests in part through slicing up movies that, deal with things that are upsetting and potentially triggering to her. At one point, she's assigned a film that is actually triggering to her, where she is not allowed to have the kind of remove, I think, that professionally she generally has when she watches this material, and she's very clinical about it, and she's not really getting sucked up into the narratives or scared or anything. But then she watches this low budget horror that has elements in common with her sister's disappearance when they were kids, which my read at least is that triggers her in a very clear, big way, and she does not get the help that she really needs at that point, and instead begins to go on this downward spiral in which, she's grappling with a lot of issues that are just like, I'm very interested in, having to do with memory and the fallibility of memory and the frustration of not being able to remember things, and how disturbing that can be, and trying to deal with that through she becomes convinced that this filmmaker was involved in the disappearance of her sister and potentially harming other women, and tries to pursue that. It's another film, the film on either of our lists, I think it has the most obvious stuff in common with, is Saint Maud. It's another one of these films with a very unreliable protagonist who is taking you along through this story, and you kind of know you cannot trust her take on things as she becomes increasingly unhinged. But this one is doing that in the milieu of, video nasties, which is also something that I am interested in. It's a film that I think really loves a lot of that kind of horror. I think it's really, I like the way it was shot. I like the way it was edited. I like the performances. It was just one of those things where I've only seen it once. I did just get the Vinegar Syndrome Blu-ray, and I'll watch it again and I'll see what I think. But I watched it and I was just like, great. This was just great. I really liked this. I'm not seeing as much enthusiasm for it amongst people I know. I don't know. Maybe it's not that great. When I watch it again, I'll be like, man, but I was like, this is great.
I can see why you liked it as much as you did. Yeah, it landed at 27 for me on my list. So
out of how many? Oh,
46?
Somewhere in the middle.
Hold on. Now I have it. It's out of 27 out of 48.
And?
My opinion of it, I thought it was fine. Like, I didn't hate it, but I also was just kind of like, this is fine.
It didn't do anything for you.
Yeah, it didn't like, I kind of got what it was going for, and there were points where I kind of tuned out a little bit. And I think some of it is just some of my enthusiasm for horror movies has waned a little bit, and so unless it's like super weird or like a classic or really goofy or something like that, like it has to have something else for me. And what this had that was different, because it wasn't like a super straightforward thing, just didn't necessarily like vibe for me. Like it has kind of a Videodrome vibe. It is kind of like a Videodrome through ways of sort of the other side of, as opposed to somebody who submits films to censor, projects to censor, somebody who is censoring things. But it didn't quite click for me. But it's not one of those ones where I'm like, why do you like this? I'm like, I get how this works, and I think there's a few other horror people that I know. I think Manny really liked it as well. If I remember what I saw in his letterbox, right? Just like, I get it.
Filmmaker Manny
Didn't click for
Serrano,
me.
listeners,
Yeah.
if you want to check out his letterboxd
Yeah.
or films.
Mass grave pictures.
Yes.
Which is very difficult to Google. Which in a past conversation,
Don't
we
wanna
had with
think
him, we had
about
a
it.
conversation about that. Anyway, so it was just probably closer to where you were with the Green Knight, where I was like, this is fine.
I mean, I like The Green Knight. I actively like and have recommended The Green Knight to people. Actually, a friend of the show, Jessica Curiel Montoya, and I were texting about The Green Knight because I was telling her that my biggest problem with it, which you might not even remember, let's see if you do, is at the very beginning. Do you remember we see a few shots of like a barnyard full of animals? Or a farmyard, or I don't know what the fuck it was called in those times. Maybe they weren't barns.
I think that was just, hey, these are our animals.
Right. Very relevant to my interests as well as Jessica's. There's a part where there's a goose and there's a goat, and the goose kind of starts to try to pick a fight with the goat. And they cut away.
Oh, and you wanted to see the fight.
Because this is something Jessica and I talk about, or animals
Geeses and goats.
Animals that could fuck you up in a fight. And geese and goats are both very high up on that list. And so I was like, oh shit. So Jessica's probably going to watch it just to see just that, if nothing else. But my main criticism of The Green Knight is, why did they cut away? I just wanted to see that goose, and that goat. Who will win? 2 will enter, 1 will fall. And I will never know. I just want to interview David Lowery about that. What happened with the goose and the goat?
I mean, we can make that movie if you want.
Can we do it? Where's the goose? I don't want to do it if people are playing the geese and the goats. I just,
no, we just get a geese and a goat, and then we get arrested.
Well,
because we have a geese and a goat fight, and I feel like that's not something that we can get away with.
Well, there's only one way to find out. And thank you, listeners. You got anything else to say, actually, before I thank the listeners, Sean? Or should
No, I think we've talked enough. We said we were going to keep it short, and I don't think we kept it quite as short as we meant to. But
we didn't keep it short.
But that's okay.
But thank you, everyone, for listening to our 2021 wrap up. If you would like to hear more episodes of this podcast, The Celluloid Mirror, brought to you by 4 Mile Circus, you can visit anchor.fm/The Celluloid Mirror, or you can also search The Celluloid Mirror on your podcast platform of choice.
And if you'd like to learn more about our projects, you can visit us at 4milecircus.com. We have multiple podcast projects. We have film projects, lots of film projects, and more. And you can share what you think about this or any of our regular episodes by reaching out to us on social media. We're at 4 Mile Circus on Instagram and Twitter.
And if you want even more, if you would like to get episodes of The Celluloid Mirror early, before the general public, you can always join our Patreon at patreon.com/4milecircus. There you can also get behind the scenes stuff of the podcast, special bonus episodes we don't release to the public, as well as most of our films and all sorts of stuff related to our films. Sean and I make films also. We don't just make podcasts. So yeah, patreon.com/4milecircus. We would love to see you there, and we would love to see you next season when season 2 proper begins. Till then, don't get COVID.
Yeah, don't get COVID. Don't give other people COVID.
Yeah, don't give other people COVID.
Exactly. All right. We'll see you guys next time. Bye.
I ended up in that hall of mirrors. There was another girl.
come with me in my dreams?
That'll do, Pig.
What happens when the story dies? The evil is set free.
I have to return some videotape.